Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome. I'm very pleased to be joined by Donny Holaschutz. Donny is the managing partner at Inodu. Inodu is a quite well-known energy transition consultancy working in the space of sustainability and energy, both in Latin America and in the US. And we've known each other a very long time. So we used to come across each other in our Latin American events in Chile and Mexico. So welcome, good to see you again, Donny.
Oh, it's great to see you, Nadeem. It's always fun talking to you about the different challenges. And it's great to see that you've transitioned from more of a renewable, which is very related, but to like the hydrogen world, which is very connected in many ways.
Uh, I think in September it'll be my 20th year in doing sort of climate related events and work. So yeah, there's been a multiple succession of markets. I was looking back at all the old carbon market stuff interesting stuff to also we did a lot of work actually in biofuels back in the day and biogas. So yeah, it's interesting to the last sort of 4 or 5 years been looking at hydrogen interesting markets. Um, in terms of your background again, yeah, I guess similar. You want to give us a quick thumbnail overview of some of the work that you've been doing and how you've come into the hydrogen space.
Sure. So yeah, we started getting involved as a company in the hydrogen space about 4 years ago, essentially. And the reason we got involved in that space is, we work a lot with big buyers of energy, commercial industrial clients. So essentially, we have expertise on trying to find the most sustainable, cheapest source of renewable energy, understanding all the costs associated with that buying that energy. And some of our clients that we had worked with basically came to us when sort of the hydrogen development was starting to get going and said, hey, we're thinking about developing green hydrogen projects. And whenever you look at green hydrogen, 50 to 80% of the cost to produce a kilogram of hydrogen is essentially the energy or the electricity that you're going to use. And so they said to us, hey, like, we want to find the place where we can find the cheapest source of energy so we can produce the cheapest source of hydrogen as we're thinking about developing these projects. And so that's how we started getting into the hydrogen game, the green hydrogen game. And then, that expanded to where the clients were like, well, let's start looking at, where the markets are, where the offtake is, like what infrastructure could we leverage? What are the risks for the different locations? So now, over the past couple of years, we've been working with different types of developers primarily working green hydrogen projects, but developers looking at sort of like smaller scale, 10 megawatt type projects to, gigawatt scale projects.
Excellent. Yeah, it's I guess infinitely more complex than renewables. If you kind of think back to renewables, it was pretty easy in terms of you obviously know your renewable resource, and it's typically either solar or wind, and you're looking for a good place where there's that resource, and also not too far to get to a grid connection. And
Sure.
I guess it's just a much more complex environment when you look thinking about planning some of the green hydrogen projects, because hydrogen is difficult to move. And
Yeah.
can you give us some of your sort of thoughts around that in terms of that sort of complexity and all the different variables? And I guess a lot of people are obviously looking at costs and trying to think
Sure.
down the track. Well, where's hydrogen going to come out as, and how is that cost curve in terms of LCOH? So yeah, I don't know what are some of your
Yeah.
thoughts?
Yeah, I think developing a hydrogen project is, especially today, is a more complex endeavor. Obviously, developing any type of project is a complex endeavor. I think there's a couple of things that are make it difficult in terms of developing. Difficulties also create opportunities, right? But I think what you're trying to do whenever you're trying to develop a hydrogen project is, obviously, the costs are very important, right? So finding the cheapest source of energy is very relevant. So you're trying to find a place where you can source that cheap source of energy. If you're going to produce green hydrogen, giving it colors maybe is not best way to describe it. If you're going to produce green hydrogen, you're looking for renewable energy, right? So you're trying to find the places with the best resource, highest capacity factors. But that's not that is not the only thing you have to think about. You have to think about, where is the demand, right, for this hydrogen? Because essentially, to be more cost competitive, the ideal place you want to be at is where you're going to be close to the cheap source of energy, and you're going to be, you're going to have some sort of advantage or cost advantage supplying the demand, right? The offtake, essentially. And that comes by, being close to where the hydrogen or ammonia or power fuel, depending on what you're going to produce, essentially where that demand is going to be. So if you're close to them, that could give you an advantage because it's going to be easy to take it to them. But there's also other variables, right? You can also, you can use existing infrastructure as well. So you have to think about that. I mean, there might be, pipelines that you could leverage, right, to move the hydrogen. There might be infrastructure that's being developed to move the hydrogen. I mean, you can even think about moving the hydrogen with rail, right? So there might be rail tracks that you can use. So you have to think about connecting both. And then, there's the other components that you have in any sort of project, right? You want to ensure that, the project is going to be well received, is going to be in terms of like a social perspective, right? The community is going to receive the hydrogen. There's not going to be issues. You're not going to be in a location where, it's going to be hard to essentially make a case for that project. Also, you want to make sure that you're not in a location where there's, you're going to have high levels of environmental risk. So you sort of have to match all these things to develop the project. And I think one of the biggest challenges as well is, if you're looking at the demand and looking at how to essentially position yourself to produce the lowest cost of hydrogen for an off-taker, one of the challenges is that, today we're in the early stages of the hydrogen market. Obviously, there's already a market for hydrogen, right, worldwide, but we're in the earlier stages of, green hydrogen, blue hydrogen production. And so there's still a certain level of uncertainty with that offtake. And so you have to sort of understand all your options of, hey, if I produce here, what are the different options for offtake? Because I don't think you want to have just one option, right? Because in the end, that might not be the option that materializes. Another thing we've seen that is interesting in the hydrogen market is that, again, we're like in earlier stages. So we see a lot of partnership between, different layers in the market, essentially. So you need to bring, because it's a complex project to develop, essentially. You need to have different types of expertise. And so we see partnerships in where, potentially the offtake is involved in the development of the hydrogen. We see partnerships where there's people that are really good. And I think this is where, oil and gas companies have a lot of expertise, is, transporting hazardous substances, right? Moving energy from one place to the other, sort of having all that infrastructure to sort of, take the energy to the incline, that it's in a liquid form, essentially. And then you also have, if you're doing green hydrogen, you have the expertise for renewable energy development. Some of the projects that we're seeing worldwide, we're looking at projects where essentially the development of the projects themselves are in the order of, there's some projects I've seen like 3-5 gigawatts of renewable energy that you're going to need. So, that's not an easy project to develop, essentially. So you need that expertise in terms of developing the renewables. And one of the things that I think is quite relevant as well in this, as you're thinking about developing a hydrogen project, is that, and what we're seeing is in most places is actually quite expensive to connect to the grid. So we've done, quite a bit of benchmarking in different locations around the world. And I mean, it depends on where you're located, essentially. But I mean, for example, if you're going to connect to the grid in California, just by grid costs, the cost of whenever you connect to the grid, you have to pay for the transmission system. You might get a capacity charge. You also have to pay for the reliability of the grid, so the ancillary services. So in the end, those costs usually get passed through to you as a buyer of energy. And if you look at some places and you just look at the transmission cost and the reliability cost without thinking about the capacity charge, you're looking in the order of $15 a megawatt hour additional. Like, for example, a place like California to connect to the grid. So essentially, there's a high incentive in many ways to develop a standalone power system and then just connect to the grid for the energy that you really need in order to firm up the project. And when it comes to green hydrogen, you can oversize the electrolyzer. I mean, there's still a bit of uncertainty of how flexible an electrolyzer is in terms of taking on that renewable energy. But you start getting to ammonia production, that becomes more challenging because you need 24/7 energy, essentially. And so there you have to start looking at either, hey, how do I source something that's non-variable? Or maybe how do I connect to the grid? So that's another challenge that sort of the whole market is facing.
I mean, you think back to developing a solar project is very easy in comparison. I mean, providing energy for continuous process like that, the Haber-Bosch process, I guess, and then going on to another order of complexity with ammonia. I guess in terms of where the industry is, and we obviously saw in the beginning of the renewable electricity industry, we saw the role of first feed-in tariffs, which were pretty sort of blunt mechanism, and then refined, I guess, to sort of reverse auctions or auctions. We're obviously now the starting gun, as it were, and we've seen the IRA, we've seen Europe's response now. What's the policy environment, and how's that affecting your clients' decision? That people must be eager to get onto the bandwagon and learn through doing and get some of those subsidies in as in early doors, or what are your thoughts? Is there real also, I guess, concern about making sure that you're building a sustainable a project that's long-term sustainable in the sense of to get the economics to work?
So, I mean, we've worked with developers that, have a global focus in terms of the development of their green hydrogen projects. And also, we've had the opportunity to engage many people in the industry. And I would say that the Inflation Recovery Act really sort of changed the game in many ways. The focus of many of our, of the companies that are developing projects out there. Because I think companies that were looking at this at a global scale, which, when you don't have any subsidies, what you're looking for is, hey, where are the places where you have the lowest cost of production and you have a market for the offtake, essentially. And so, companies were matching that up and picking places to develop. Essentially, obviously, the U.S. was always a place of interest. It has cheap source of energy, and it had the demand, essentially. But there were people looking at Australia, looking at in South America, Chile, which was also on the map because of their low cost of production, the Middle East, essentially. So that was sort of the way of looking at the world. But once the Inflation Reduction Act passed, essentially, that sort of changed the game a little bit because it put those subsidies, sort of at the forefront of development, because they're nice subsidies, essentially, and it makes hydrogen production much cheaper, essentially, and so that's reshifted the focus, and now what we see is many countries are sort of looking at that and coming up with their own subsidies. But I mean, really, in the long term, I think you brought up a great point. I mean, in the long term, what really is going to drive the market is the places, you're going to want to produce a hydrogen regardless of the subsidy, right? You're going to want to produce a hydrogen where you have the lowest cost of production, and also you have a certain access to the markets, right? Where you want to have that offtake essentially. And so in the end, I think, right now we're at the stage where these subsidies are quite relevant. But I think in the long term, as we look into the future, the cost of producing hydrogen is going to keep coming down, especially green hydrogen is very correlated to the cost of renewables coming down. And at some point, the subsidies are not going to matter as much. Essentially, what's really going to drive is sort of the cost of production. And I think it'll be interesting how this whole phase evolves. But I think one thing about sort of these subsidies is definitely creating more excitement in terms of tangible demand, and it's making the economics look better for the offtake essentially, and making hydrogen more competitive, hydrogen production and hydrogen byproduct production, hydrogen derivative production much more competitive essentially, and so that'll be interesting to see how it all evolves.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it certainly will provide I guess enough security to get first wave of projects moving and help the industry develop. And yeah, some of the technological challenges that still remain, it's the value chain, whether it's midstream or even the production side, etc. So yeah, it's going to be a fascinating space. But I guess the subsidy thing reminds me, I can't remember who once said about a lot of businesses became subsidy addicts, as it were. So it's just, you don't want to become a subsidy junkie. You want to keep your eyes on the prize, which is always driving the business based on sort of costs and long-term performance. So yeah, fascinating space. You're obviously going to be speaking at World Hydrogen North America Congress, which is not far from where you are right now, up the road in Houston. So yeah, we look forward to you taking part and having your intelligent input as ever. So yeah, it's been great chatting to you, Donny, and we look forward to seeing how the market evolves and seeing you help your clients with the conundrums and the complexity of it all.
Well, thank you, Nadeem. It's always great talking to you. It's always a fun conversation for sure. Yeah. You've always been in the vanguard of sort of the energy system transformation, and I think this is a very interesting space full of challenges and opportunities. And I'm looking forward to the conference, and looking forward to seeing you in person, and also looking forward to meeting very interesting people. Last year was, it was a great conference, and it was, great to see what was going on in the industry. And I'm really looking forward to this year as well.
Excellent. Many thanks. Thanks for your kind words. I look forward to meeting up again. Take care.
All right. Thanks.
Yes. Bye-bye.